Hello and welcome back to my weekly review of The Mandalorian. Today's episode is The Spies. It was directed by Rick Famuyiwa and written by Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau. This week we see the Mandalorian tribes reunite and send a small scouting party to retake the Forge of Mandalore. The episode opens with Elia Kane on Coruscant. It's a dark and stormy night and Kane stealthily sneaks into an alleyway to find an Imperial probe droid waiting for her. She gives it her chain code and an image of Moff Gideon appears. She reports that the Mandalorians have attacked the pirates over Navarro, and Gideon tells her to continue her work on Coruscant. He will deal with the Mandalorians himself. The show then switches perspective to Moff Gideon walking down the halls of his Imperial fortress. He enters a meeting room where the images of several other Imperial officers are already waiting. There is a lot of tension in the room as they discuss Admiral Thrawn and a change of leadership in his absence. When Gideon seems to overstep his bounds, the Commandant tries to call him out for an excessive reinforcement request, but Gideon turns it on him and uses it as an opportunity to tell them about the reappearance of the Mandalorians. The group finds this news disturbing and agrees to his request in order to see them destroyed forever. Back on Navarro, the Night Owls arrive and meet the Children of the Watch for the first time. Greef Karga shows up alongside them and gives Din a bottle of booze from Coruscant and a reconfigured IG-11. It's set up so that Grogu can pilot it. Din resists at first, but Grogu hops inside and starts running around causing trouble in the suit before Din can stop him. That night there's a tense atmosphere as the Night Owls eat unhelmeted in front of the Children of the Watch. Bo breaks the tension by telling them she wants to retake Mandalore starting with the Great Forge. Many volunteer and the next day they set off. Bo-Katan leads Din, Rook, Paz, Ax, Casca, and a small group of Mandalorians from both tribes down onto the surface where they begin scanning for the remains of the Great Forge. During their search, Bo sees a ship approaching them from a distance and she calls out to the others to take defensive positions. They're surprised when a group of Night Owls appears instead of an enemy. They've been surviving on the planet since the destruction of Mandalore. Bo and the others offer them aid and Bo tells them all the truth about the destruction. That she surrendered and gave Moff Gideon the dark saber, but he destroyed the planet anyway. Rook Cass takes the wounded and sick from the new group back to their ships in orbit, and Bo-Katan takes the rest towards the Great Forge. They know where it is, and their desert ship is faster than walking. During the voyage, Paz and Ax get into a scuffle. It almost turns deadly when Grogu steps in with his new suit and breaks it up. Later, a giant monster appears from the ground, destroying their ship and forcing them underground for the rest of their journey. When they arrive at the Great Forge, they find it's been repurposed by Imperial forces. They're ambushed by elite troopers with jetpacks, and the group makes an opening for Ax to escape and go for reinforcements. They defeat the Imperials and continue forward into a hangar. A trap is sprung on them and Din is captured while the others are stuck between two blast doors. Gideon offers them a chance to leave in exchange for the Darksaber and the planet, but Bo refuses and uses the Darksaber to cut a hole in the rear door. Gideon orders his troops to execute them and leaves. Paz Vizsla takes the front and holds off the troopers long enough for the others to escape before locking the door behind them and taking on a horde of troopers by himself. He fires until his gun melts and then finishes off the remaining troopers by hand. When 3 Praetorian guards appear, he opens his shield and pulls his dagger and puts up an admirable fight against them but is ultimately slain. They leave his corpse amongst the dead. Ooh boy, was that a big episode or what? We got a ton of setup, the return of Moff Gideon, a direct mention of Admiral Thrawn, and a mini war between the Imperials and the Mandalorians. The story was exciting from start to finish, and even in the intermediate moments, it still had something fun to offer. Grogu was hilarious with his new suit. As soon as he jumped in, it was like he had gone from a baby to a toddler. He suddenly abused his power to say yes and no, and took full advantage of his new limbs. The relationship between him and Din deepens, and Grogu gets a lot more agency in this episode. He got to step between the two Mandalorians, help a little in the battle, and now there's no reason to leave him behind on adventures. He has his own little armor suit. The tension between the two tribes was a lot of fun too, and it was interesting to see the differences between all of them. Their experiences, their knowledge of their own culture and history, and how similar they all are despite their differences. That battle between Ax and Paz was brutal, and I'd love to see more of those types of conflicts in the future. It shows off the eagerness they have toward combat. I also can't wait to find out whether that giant monster was the legendary Pokemon or just another big creature waiting in the depths of Mandalore. The story was consistent and fun and does a good bit of character development. It shows off some lore and culture and sets up a gigantic finale. The only real complaint I had was with the dialogue and how cliché most of it was. The story is already highly trope-filled, the dialogue just ups the ante. The cast for this episode included most of the named Mandalorians, the return of Elia Kane and Moff Gideon, and introduced some new Mandalorians and Imperials. The time gets split pretty evenly across the board, with Giancarlo Esposito, Katie Sackhoff, and Pedro Pascal getting the most. Giancarlo Esposito reemerges as Moff Gideon in this episode and makes a huge impression. He plays mind games with the Imperial Council, savoring every moment of it as they fall perfectly in place to support his plan. In the end, he's enjoying his assumed victory over the Mandalorians, and he gives a great bad guy speech outlining all of his plans. It's a shame he told them all of the details they needed to stop him. Poor guy needs a better speechwriter. Katie Sackhoff seems burdened by leadership, and she does a good job of trying to lead the Mandalorians while still showing off a bit of hesitancy. She plays the emotions in a slightly muted way, but it works well for a leader trying to hold back their fear. Pedro Pascal doesn't get to do much more than make some Jon Snow-style speeches about loyalty, and a bit of dialogue here and there. He does it well, but he doesn't get any big standout moments. The cast in general doesn't get to have big moments, but the stunt team does. The last fight between Paz Vizsla and the Praetorian Guard was awesome, and brutal at the same time. The way it ended was such a cinematic death that I had to nod my head in respect. That said, the visuals were not well done in this episode. Aside from the final fight and the fight between Paz Vizsla and Ax, the rest of the episode looked terrible. The first half of it was a CGI overload with Coruscant, and then the giant ships landing in an open desert area, and then on Mandalore with the entire surface looking like the same two pre-rendered landscapes. The sun is literally in the same spot the entire time they're outside, despite at least one day passing in time. The journey looked terrible in this episode, and it's so obvious they're trying to use the soundstage to save on cost. This is a billion-dollar company that refuses to build even basic sets for one of its biggest properties. Once they got into the caves, it was a little bit better, but they still had these god-awful CGI backgrounds in every shot. The first battle between the stormtroopers and the Mandalorians was a slugfest with guns in front of a green screen. It was a lot of simple cutting around with reaction shots of people shooting and getting hit. It was unclear what hits were going to take anyone down or when people were actually getting hurt. I had no idea who was winning, and the story made it seem like they were in an impossible spot, but then they just killed them all and moved on like it was nothing. At least with Paz at the end, it was clear his minigun was cutting through their armor. Sound-wise, the episode makes a return to Star Wars form with orchestral tracks backing most of the episode and trying to follow and amplify the emotions of any given moment. We get the return of Moff Gideon's theme, some great action remixes of the Mandalorian theme, and the song that played during Paz Vizsla's fall was epic. It sounded great, was significant in the space, and really brought the flavor. Overall, the episode had a lot of great moments in it. A good bit of humor coming from Grogu in his new suit, an epic last stand from Paz Vizsla, and set up a huge ending. You have two giant personalities in Bo-Katan and Moff Gideon, and seeing them go to war is going to be one hell of a ride. The music was great, and those two melee fights were great. Even if the visuals for the rest of the episode sucked, there's still enough here to enjoy. It doesn't try anything new or experimental, but it's got a lot of heart. 7 out of 10. Remember, these are just my thoughts on the episode. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below.
Grogu is too young to operate heavy machinery. Maybe when he's older.
No.
What do you mean, no?
No.
I think he's saying he's old enough to operate it.
Yes.